an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, Dandelion Dynasty, Book 2, Chapters 14 and 15, The Hike Up the Mountain, and A Rebellion of Scholars. In these chapters, man, y'all, I am so eager to hear the rest of Zomi's thesis. I say the rest of it, we really haven't heard much of the thesis so much as her contempt for everybody involved and that she pretty much lied about all of her opinions in order to get an audience in the first place. And you know what? 100% here for it. Here for it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very, very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Last weekend, I covered chapters 12 and 13, so I'm a little ahead of the schedule. I'm actually not sure if the schedule was updated on the Spoil Me spreadsheet, but it was an unplanned one that I did because one of the recordings got screwed up. So just in case any of you are like, wait, what happened? These chapters, y'all, I was dying to continue reading. I really was. Chapter 14, we step back in time again here. And this is her and Luan going up the side of this mountain, and reminder that Zomi has a lot of trouble walking. So for a great deal of this, Luan is carrying her. And it's very frustrating to her. You know, he is sort of working on something on the balloon, and he's very cagey about it and doesn't tell her what it is. And I think at one point she walks in and he sort of covers up whatever it was. And I theorized that it was something like a brace for her leg. And I wondered why he was being really secretive about it. And I think part of me thought maybe he's afraid to get her hopes up. Maybe he doesn't want her to get too excited at the concept of this thing that might not pan out. But then we find out that he understands the fact that Zomi is pretty self-conscious about her leg and doesn't like people to talk about it to her. She just kind of wants to be treated as if that isn't going on as much as possible. I find it really interesting, the differences between people and how they handle disabilities and setbacks like this. It's a really, and I'm not trying to say that one way of coping is more or less right than another way, but I do find that there are ways in which people cope that I respond more favorably to, which I'm sure is due to my own baggage and stuff. And there are going to be ways that would be the smarter way to handle it for one person because of their personality. But if someone else did it, I would feel that's not a good plan. You shouldn't be. And one of the things that I always think of, when I was working at this hotel, I was working at one of those home, I can't remember, it was a long stay Marriott Suites. It was one of those places that has a kitchenette with the room, and it was all very meant for long-term stays of, several weeks. And we would get a lot of people who were going through renovations and stuff. And then we had a family who had lost their home in a fire. And it was really awful. This woman was at the counter checking in and in tears, explaining what had happened. An older woman just really grieving heavily. And I didn't react oh God, why don't you keep it to yourself? Stop crying. But I definitely was wow, that really sucks. I hope that she's able to kind of calm down and cope with this better. And I definitely thought of the words better because I was not being very compassionate to what it must be like to lose your entire home. And it was hard for me as a stranger to know how to respond to somebody coming at you with real emotions like that. And then there was another family who had been staying with us 2 weeks. And the guy was the father of these like 3 kids. It was him and his wife and 3 kids. And the father had been very upbeat and positive. And then we found out that their home had also burned down. And part of me was really impressed with the fact that he was able to be so upbeat and positive, like nothing was wrong. And so I had no idea. And then as I got older, I was kind of like, is that really like better though? Is that something that we want? Do we want people to go on out into the world as if nothing is wrong when they suffered this kind of setback? And what must it be like for his wife and children who maybe are grieving deeply and maybe don't feel like they can admit to that in front of a man who seems to be unfazed? And there's certainly possibility that he was this way with me and other staff members, but amongst his family, he was very different. But it just like over the course of time, my response to each of them and my comparing the 2 of them has changed. The perspective that I have on that has changed a lot. And I feel like I admired him so much and was not too impressed with this woman. And then as I get older, I'm kind of like, I feel like she's being at least more honest, you know? And I can't say that I wouldn't necessarily be the exact same way if it were my house. So there's also that aspect of like, am I being disdainful of somebody handling this in a way that feels sort of weak to me? Because that's how I would react. And I'm judging myself, but pretending I'm judging her. And Zomi's like dealing with her disability is it's like, it's one of those things that she has to be carried and she lets him carry her. So she's like, it's not like she's unwilling to acknowledge that this is a problem. There are people out there who will just try and power through something like this and be like, no, I can do it. And they don't really want to accept that, like, whether the will is there or not, your body is physically not capable of certain things, and that's fine. So it's an interesting thing that despite the fact that she accepts this help and she is willing to admit that she needs it up to a point, she still doesn't really want it acknowledged out loud that she has accepted this help. And I find that line to be compelling. Like, you know, what exactly, where is it in her that she draws the line, that she feels like, all right, no, I don't want to talk about this anymore. The 2 women who are leading them up the mountain, by the way, are sisters. And they are just like talking to one another heading up. And Zomi and Luan, I don't know how much Luan understands about what they're saying. I think that he's like translating as best he can when it's necessary. But for the most part, it's just the 2 of them. The necessity for her teacher to carry her dampened Zomi's joy, and bored, she made the mistake of looking down the side of the path once, which made her wrap her arms around Luan's neck and hang on for dear life. Yeah, listen, guys, I am really afraid of heights. It's kind of funny. I think I might have mentioned this in a previous episode because of the balloon. Going up in a hot air balloon, it feels very like enclosed and safe. And I don't know that I would be completely like unmoved by it, but I feel like I wouldn't react quite the same way. Being on like a cliff's edge on a really high, steep path, that will mess me up. I've walked places like that before where there was no handrail. There was nothing between you and the sheer drop. And there is a part of me that I know a lot of people have this. It's less the fear of falling, although that is absolutely there also. There's a definite sense of, if I could just make one wrong step here and just sort of slip or twist the wrong way or trip and I'm dead. I'm gone. Bye. Like, I have to be so careful, and any change in fate and luck will cause my death. And that one fucks me up. And then there's also the one where you feel like you want to jump. And I hate that. I will be overcome with that feeling sometimes, where I'm standing on something and there's this huge expanse in front of me and the air is clear and it's sunny and it's beautiful. And I'm like, ooh, I just want to like jump out into this and sail down. I don't want to hit the ground. I don't want that part. But part of me thinks that I would enjoy hang gliding because it would satisfy that like need to jump. But yeah, I really sympathize with Zomi in this moment. I mean, there are even some video games that Owen was playing Skyrim a few days ago, and like I had to look away because he was climbing this cliff. It's like not real, and it still got to me, you know? So yeah, the poor thing. And she asked why they couldn't have just taken the balloon. And he's like, the trees are too close together. Everything is there's no room for us to just land. So she they have to stop for her to catch her breath, and then they manage to keep going. And she asks why Luan wants to get up to the top so bad in the first place. And he says treasure. And she thinks that he means like, you know, pirate treasure, money, gems, that kind of thing. And he says, not exactly. I've been here twice before, but this year is different. Over the winter, there was a volcanic eruption atop the mountain, and I've never had a chance to observe how nature repairs itself after such a disturbance. Did you notice how dry things were down in the village? I expect that's related to the eruption, too. This book may be big, but it's a pale copy of the Book of Nature, the greatest treasure of them all. You gave up a life in the palace just to travel all over Dara collecting plants and sketching animals? Some like to hunt trophies. I like to gather knowledge. Zomi thought of her own long walks along the beach and the days she spent wandering through the fields and woods of home, noting the patterns of racing clouds and blooming flowers and murmuring winds, hoping to understand the voices of the gods. Yes, odd as her teacher was, Luan was a kindred spirit. So yeah, I like that because I never really put it together. Her trying to hear the voice of the gods is in a way like a meditation and a studying of nature, you know? I think that's kind of cool. I just didn't really put those two things together, but they are not that distantly related. So I really liked that. So they stop at this bush and she asks what it is and he puts her down. And behind them, the two sisters are moving outward, and they are gathering different plants. They're digging up like root vegetables and stuff. They are gathering bird eggs as well. And they're very talented at this because they have so much practice. And she's watching them just like, you know, nimbly climbing around, jumping from place to place. And she feels like this stab of longing for being able-bodied and being able to do what these women are doing. And she has to tell herself to stop thinking about it because she knows she'll just drive herself crazy if she keeps going down this road. But like, understandably, that is a tough thing to let go of. So he starts cutting branches from this bush. And there are these really long, flexible branches that he is very entranced by because they just seem extremely strong. He's able to bend them quite a bit and they don't snap or crack or give any indication that they are about to break. So he begins to put something together and he says, "Can you sit over here, hold on to the vines and give me your leg?" Zomi looked at him suspiciously. She did not like it when people paid attention to her weak leg, much less when another person touched it. "Are you scared?" Luan said, a teasing smile at the corners of his mouth as he held up the strange contraption he had built. That settled it. Zomi crawled near him, wrapped the vines around her own arms, and held out her left leg with some effort so that it rested in Luan's lap. "I'm afraid of nothing." "Of course not," said Luan, and he wrapped the framework around Zomi's legs. Once the branches were braced around her calf, he tightened the ox sinew so that the branches dug into Zomi's skin. Ouch! Zomi cried. So he goes a little bit gentler, and she lets him like flex and bend her knee, her leg. And he says, while your body is getting used to this, I might as well teach you about the third and fourth schools of philosophy, fluxism and moralism. So the first one, let's see, he says, the founding sage of the fluxists is Ra-Oji, the ancient Ano epigrammist. He once said, a moralist is someone who can tell you how everyone ought to behave except himself. And Zomi is very entertained by this. He says, we don't know much about him, except that he was a generation younger than Configi, which, that's the philosopher that we know very well from these books so far. He must have come from a very learned family, as his knowledge of ancient Ano traditions from before their coming to the islands of Dara was extensive. Many Ano books lost during the Diaspora Wars are known to us now only as fragments that have survived in his poems and parables, and he wrote a lively, moving biography of Aruano, the great lawgiver who created the Tiro states. As a young man, he made his name by debating Configi. And I love this moment. Zomi's like, he what? He debated him? I've never heard of that ever happening. And he's like, yeah, it's weird how moralists just kind of pretend that's not an option, isn't it? Which I was just like, oh, yeah, how about that? So Configi came to the court of the King of Kukru to advocate a return to the funeral rites of the ancient past as practiced on the sunken continent in the west. The rites were rigidly defined for different classes. Lengthy mourning periods, yada, yada, yada. Like all of these different rules and customs. And as he's explaining all of this, Zomi's like checking out. And just like, yeah, this sounds really useful. Super, super interesting that they did all of this stuff. And she says, I bet they also had different rules for men and women. And he says, you're thinking like a patternist, and you'd be right. The King of Kukru was as skeptical as you. Configi argued that the rites were important because they enacted and embodied the respect due to each rank. Ranks are made real. The technical term in moralism is reified through practice. Abstract principles are given life through performance, just as applying the same rules to friends and foes alike meaning to honor. Giving away possessions supplies content to charity, and reducing punishments and taxes provides significance to mercy. The adherence to seemingly arbitrary codes of behavior can reify a structure for society that leads to stability. And Zomi says that there isn't any soul to those kinds of performances. This isn't like actually embodying real honor or mercy or charity by accomplishing something. You're just playing a role and doing what you're told. And he says, like, the theory is by acting morally, one becomes moral. And she's like, I don't know about this. She asks what Ra-Oji said during his debate. And Luan says, well, he started off by not saying anything. And it was said when he came into the court of the King of Kukru on that day, all the men and women just gawked. Because he was very handsome, asked Zomi, slightly disappointed. She had been thinking of this Ra-Oji who debated the stuffy old Configi as a hero of sorts. That he was handsome seemed to detract from the vision. Guys, I just would like to point out how wonderful this line is, because it's so interesting, the difference in the ways that men and women and boy and girls minds work in this sort of respect. I love that Zomi's like, listen, if he's too good looking, I'm not buying this at all. Meanwhile, for a lot of young men and grown men, if a woman shows up to state her mind, but she is not attractive, she is given a lot less wide a berth to speak her mind and taken a lot less seriously. But if you're too good looking, that detracts also. So it's just like, it's interesting the way that our attitudes about things are so predicated on someone's appearance, but it's really true. So he says, no, it was because he came in riding on the back of a water buffalo. And she's like, wait, what? Are you serious? And he's like, yeah, I mean, the king was just like, what the fuck? Don't you have any respect? And Raoji is like, I'm not in control of this water buffalo. And he says, when our ancestors came to these islands, they let the flow of the ocean's currents carry them wherever the ocean pleased. And likewise, I let the buffalo wander wherever he will. Life is much more enjoyable when I ride the flow instead of worrying about how many times to brush the ground with my sleeves or how deeply to bow. At this, the king of Kukru realized that Raoji was challenging Konfiji, so he stroked his beard and asked, then how do you answer Master Konfiji's advocacy for a return to ancient rights to achieve a more moral society where each knows his duty? And he says, well, our ancestors were ruled by nature, and the stability of small villages was what was the most important. Now we have all of these larger islands. We have the entire ocean to deal with rather than our small piece of it. Our people must contend with migrating shoals of fish, unpredictable typhoons, tsunamis, volcanoes. We've had to invent new logograms to describe new sights, and the only certainty of life is that it's uncertain. With new circumstances come new philosophies, and it is flexibility and resilience, not rigid adherence to tradition, that will serve us well. And Konfiji is like, that doesn't make any sense. The way that we live has changed, but death and life are the same. We still should be respectful to our elders. We still should have ways to commemorate the accomplishments of people when they die by, burying them a certain way. And essentially his response is, look, when we die, we're going to be turned to dust and eaten by worms, just like everybody else. Really, we can make this big pomp and circumstance about someone's rank. It doesn't actually matter in the end. We all just are dust. And he says, I will be returning to the great flow of the universe, and such honor can never be matched by mortal rites enacted by those obeying dead words copied out of a book. And Zomi starts cheering and stands up, and Luan gets this beaming smile, and Zomi looks down and realizes that her leg is supporting her weight because of this framework that he has built for her. And she's like, what the fuck? How did you do this? And he explains that working with the Gin, that there were a lot of veterans who'd lost limbs, and they developed all kinds of things to help them cope with that. And he just kind of applied some of that to this. And Zomi is so excited. She's able to walk around in a way that she hasn't been for literal years now. And she still is going to need his help making her way up the mountain. But if she were walking around on flat ground, she'd be pretty much okay. And it's really sweet that she looks at him and realizes he's been working on this and he just hasn't told her about it. And she just gives him this huge hug. And it was so sweet. I just really liked this. So finally, they reach this point. They continue climbing. It's been a long day. She's asking the names of all these plants and animals and birds and all this stuff as they head up. And he's teaching her all of the different logograms for different things, classifications. And he says, he points out that because she asks why the flower semantic root is in the logogram for a mushroom. And he's like, oh, that's back when we thought mushrooms were plants and we didn't realize that they were from a different kingdom. that we know fungi. I don't know if that word is used here. I don't think so. But he's like, so it just got established that way and it's continued on. And she's like, why the fuck are we continuing on and studying logograms for things that are inaccurate? What are we doing? And he's not even like, he's just straight up says, what do you mean? To which I'm like, Luan, what does she mean? This isn't that hard, dude. There's all of these accumulated mistakes and they are continuing and perpetuating them. And he's like, all right, look, that's a fair question. But what you're suggesting is that every time we learn a new thing, we scrap the logogram that we've been using and start again. And that constant attempt to get to the perfect logogram is going to be way too difficult for us to get into the common knowledge and understanding. That takes years and years for everyone to begin to adopt a new method of conveying an idea. So we can't just be changing it up every time we learn a new thing, because we won't all be able to stay on the same page enough. It'll just be too difficult, which I do see his point. And in the end, he tells her, between Konfiji and Raoji, it's not absolutely clear cut which one of them was right and which was wrong. There are a lot of things that Konfiji took too seriously. But there are some things that pointing out the importance of tradition and paying attention to the experience of elders and the, patterns of things that we have done are something important that we should pay attention to. And I just really like this. We're not gods. We can't always tell truth from error, and it's better to be cautious, which I liked. So then they have this moment that's so interesting. They hear the two sisters shouting excitedly, and they smell smoke, and they're running up, and it looks like the lava is still flowing here, and that the sisters are standing in the middle of it, and there's the smell of smoke, and Luan reaches out and grabs Zomi to pull her away from what he thinks is the burning lava. And then it turns out that they are flowers that are giving off the scent of this smoke. And that's what they're smelling. And the flowers are this fiery crimson color with berries. And it just is super, super reminiscent of live flowing lava. But it's plants that have learned to grow in the lava. And Luan's like, all right, be careful of breathing too much of this, because this is really strong and something tells me that it may be able to have an effect on you. And it's just so cool. Luan's sees that there are these really fine sort of, roots that spread out over the surface of the rock, and is just really compelled by the fact that something has managed to live in an environment that does not seem like it would be able to sustain life. And it's just so cool. And he's never seen anything like this before. The two sisters are super excited. They clearly have never seen this before either. And they ask him to name it. And he says, since this fiery plant is so impatient to explore lands where others fear to tread, why don't we name it Zomi, the Pearl of Fire? And she is delighted by this. And he turns to the faces of the women frozen in shock and sees thick columns of smoke rising in the direction they had come from. So I don't care for this. I don't know what this means, but I don't like the ending of that chapter at all. Kyle's in the chat says, I absolutely love this nuanced and intelligent discussion of philosophy. That's what sets the series apart for me. It's a fantasy series that explores all these different aspects of life, not just war and political skullduggery. Yeah, it's true. I feel like there are some fantasy series that explore this in that they explore the ideologies of different characters with their own belief systems and views of the world. But the fact that this book is addressing it in hypotheticals about sages and philosophers in their own history gives it a very different feeling. And it seems much more we don't have to be in the mind of a character who is acting out their ideologies. We can talk about the history of these philosophers and how it affects the country that they're living in as a whole, rather than an individual person, which gives more of a sense of place and just world builds a little bit, you know? So we go to the throne room. We're coming back to the present, where Kuni is listening to all of the different theses, and the kids have really like made it clear that they are behind this curtain and kind of gotten themselves in trouble. It says Gia and Rasana looked mortified. The ministers and generals and nobles struggled to maintain serious means, their bodies shaking with suppressed laughter. Zato Ruthie is real mad. Like, Zato Ruthie has no sense of humor. I mean, it's fair. And finally, Kuni's like, you guys may as well all come in. Come on. And they all stream out with Lady Soto at the end, just like, the kids just do what they want to do. I'm sorry. I love that Kuni's like, they do have quick feet, as if they like got away from her somehow, and not that she was just standing there behind the curtain with them, encouraging them to like think things over and ask questions. And I love that Firo comes out and is like, so many people here. We had no idea, making his eyes really big. And Kuni like gives him a look and is clearly like, yeah, you fucking knew. Get out of here. Renga, said Timu, bowing deeply. He was very nervous, as he always was, in front of his father, and though his lips kept on moving, no more sound would emerge. You're here, said Kuni. It was hard to tell by his tone if it was a simple observation, an encouragement, or a lament. After a moment, he let the cowrie veil fall back in place. All of you, sit at the base of the dais and observe. So, yeah, this is an interesting moment because I have been, for some reason, operating under the misapprehension that Timu is not good at this and that Kuni doesn't know it yet. And I don't know why I thought that, because it seems pretty clear Kuni knows who his son is already. And you don't want to be discouraging to your child and be like, listen, you're bad at this. But you also don't want to have your life's work and your entire kingdom and the well-being of your people fall into the hands of somebody who is incapable of, you know, doing their duty by them. And of course, Kuni has been closely observing Timu and trying to figure out whether he can do this job. I don't know why I kind of thought that it was like still, you know, something that we had to, it remains to be seen. But it seems like he's got the measure of him and is like really trying to be encouraging as much as he can, but he isn't. The vibe here of the fact that it's not clear makes me feel like he's sort of realizing that there's not really a lot of room for growth here. There's just something about this that makes me feel like he knows this kid isn't going to be able to do it. And he just hasn't decided what he's going to do about that. So Kuni turned back and was just about to pick up the conversation with Zomi when a loud clang came from somewhere far away. It sounded like hundreds of gongs were being struck. The grand audience hall quieted, and now the assembled lords could hear the faint sounds of a crowd shouting in the distance. "What's happening?" asked Rasana. And he starts to just be like, let's just continue with the examination. And she says, "I've already started it." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And she says, "The best of the best in Dara are rioting in the streets. That's my presentation." And everybody sort of sits up and is like, what? Because she looks poor. She's a woman. They're all really prepared to just be bored out of their fucking minds. And then she says something actually interesting. And they're like, oh, maybe this will be a thing after all. The Kashima who failed to place in the ranks of the Furoa are assembling in Kruben Square in front of the palace to protest, Zomi said. Judging by the noise, they've drawn many onlookers, some of whom may take advantage of the situation to engage in a bit of looting under the theory that the law cannot punish a mob. You started this riot? Asked Kuni, his tone severe. I may have been the spark that began the fire, said Zomi, but trust me, I was not responsible for the dangerous accumulation of fuel. And I think it's, let's see, Kuni glanced at Defiro Miro, who started to head for the grand audience hall. Captain, said the Empress, you may need to summon the city garrison. A riot in the streets must be swiftly put down. And Kuni tells her, no, these are just students. We can't just go out there and fucking kill them. I don't want it handled that way. So Defiro, heads out, but is going to apparently just try and, calm everybody, which I don't know how that is going to work. But Kuni turns back to Zomi and is like, all right, so then what the hell is your grievance? What's the deal? And she says, the people do not believe the grand examination was fairly administered. And at this point, Zato Ruthie is so deeply offended. I kind of love this. Oh, sorry, I hit my mic. I kind of love this because this is something that I feel a lot of people today do not fully understand. And it's easy to understand why, because it's super nuanced and it requires an understanding of human psychology and parts of our history that we don't like to talk about. And overall, an acknowledgement of some ugliness that we just love to pretend isn't there. Because the truth is, a lot of our success and failure in the world is down to chance. And as human beings, we do not like that. We don't like the concept that chance plays any sort of role. We want to be in control of things, and we want to tell ourselves that our choices will lead to our successes and or failures, and that if we make the right choices, we are guaranteed a positive outcome in life, because that's a very comforting thing to believe. And the truth is that we are not in control most of the time. I would say 80% of the time. We do our best with our 20%. We try to make the smartest decisions we can within our 20%. But I think much more of our lives are down to chance than we want to admit. You can look both ways while crossing the street, and that's as much as you can do. You have no control over whether some drunk asshole is going to come careening around the corner at 60 miles an hour in a 25 zone. You have zero control over that person. All you can do is keep your eyes open. You can accumulate the amount of savings that you want to accumulate, and you have no control over whether or not you are going to be diagnosed with cancer and require treatments that will empty out that savings account. You can try and eat well to ensure that you're healthy. Still doesn't necessarily matter. Your body gonna do what it gonna do, and you don't get a lot of say in that. And there's just a lot of things in life that are this way, that we just try and act like, well, if people made better choices, they would shut up. People don't become homeless because they chose to be homeless. People don't go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical debt because they were super excited to go get chemotherapy. This is just, so this thing with Zato being offended at the fact that she is claiming that this was administered unfairly. Zato believes that he is in control of whether or not this test was fair. And the thing that Zato doesn't understand is that he is bringing to the table an inherent bias that he is not aware of. And that's all Zomi's saying. She's like, he is biased. He is working within a certain structure of education that is very particular to a certain region. And she points this out because, he is so angry talking about all of the scrupulous ways we ordered clerks to collect the essays and make sure that they did this. Any violators were disqualified. Only anonymous essays were brought in. They were assigned random numbers. And he just goes on and on about all of the things that they did to shield the actual, submissions from being associated with a particular person's name or whatever, because he believes that anonymity is all that Zomi is talking about. He thinks that Zomi is insinuating he favored certain students over other students because of their association with certain families or whatever. And that's not what she's saying. And we'll get to this. But I just really like how much he has his mind, when she says unfair, his mind immediately goes to like nepotism and favoritism, which of course is like something that we should be concerned about. But he fails to understand the kinds of unfairnesses that are outside of his control and his like awareness. So Kuni is like, finally like, dude, I know all this, stop. Cause he goes on for like 2 paragraphs. He says, I give no credence to the charges of these sore losers. And Zomi says, that is fairness only in the method, not substance. And Ruthie is just fucking losing it. He's like shaking. He's so angry. And Ruthie says, this has nothing to do with the essay that you submitted that got you here, that you were supposed to make a presentation about. And here comes Zomi with the most shade I've ever read. My essay was merely a pastiche of your old ideas. The best way to please a judge is to regurgitate his own ideas back at him in new clothing. Of course I won't present that to the emperor. And Ruthie is about to have a motherfucking heart attack. Like, she says this and he's like so angry that he like can't form words, which I have so been there. And she just breezes right past him and says, Master Ruthie, can you tell us how many of the Kashima examinees who entered the grand examination were from Han? So he says 73. How many were from Wolf's Paw? 161. From Rui? 96. Zomi nodded. That's about what you'd expect based on their respective populations. But out of the 100 Kashima who achieved the rank of Firoa, how many are from Han? 51. From Wolf's Paw? 10. From Rui? There were no Kashima from Rui who achieved the rank of Firoa this year. Then she looked at the 9 other Panmeiji seated next to her. Can you tell me where you're from? Han. Gejira. Han. Wolf's Paw. Han. Han. Arulugi. Fasa. East Kakru. Zomi looked around the grand audience hall, eyes flashing. I am, of course, a daughter of Dasu. Master Ruthie, you're from Rima. The Prime Minister is from Kakru. But where are the other 6 judges on your panel from? One is a learned scholar from Arulugi, and the others are famous teachers in Han. Zomi gazed at the emperor. I think the numbers speak for themselves. And Zato, of course, is still like, what are you saying? You're not proving anything. If I were so unscrupulous, wouldn't I have elevated at least one scholar from Rima into your exalted rank? And Zomi says, no, dude, you're acting like I'm saying that you did this shit on purpose. That's not what I'm saying. You're not intentionally doing this shit. But you can still do things that are unfair. And she says, when the distribution of honors is so lopsided, one must presume a flaw in the process. It is substance that matters, not procedure. Y'all, this is what people who try to claim racism is no longer a thing don't get. All you need to do is look at the many studies that have been done about the ratio of black people being arrested for crimes versus the number of black people, like the ratio within the population. And you can see how insanely lopsided those numbers are. And unless you believe that the law is totally blind and those lopsided numbers are because black people are simply more prone to crime, which makes you a racist, guess what? You have to admit that there is a flaw in the system itself. Those kinds of lopsided numbers do not make any sense unless you genuinely believe that black people are going to be criminals more often than white people. You have to pick one, because there's a reason those numbers are lopsided. It's one or the other. And people don't realize when they're saying that it's black people are more prone to crime, that's racism. You believe black people are going to be criminals more often. That's you being racist. That's it. That's all it is. And that's what's causing the police to arrest more black people as well, because they apparently believe this bullshit too. And it's just like, people don't seem to understand the results of the examinations are so lopsided that cannot be accidental. And it can't be this lopsided every time by accident. It can't always be this way every time purely by accident. So he says, far from indicating bias, the numbers prove that the panel did their job. And he then goes on to talk about how the people of Han are just more dedicated to learning and scholarship, that on Rui there are not very many academies, that the rulers of Zana were not devoted to the pursuit of wisdom. Just tries to say, like, well, culturally speaking, these places, they place more importance on education, and it makes sense that more people from there would be better educated and better equipped to write these essays. Again, this is the argument that a lot of people come up with. It's like, well, a lot of black folks they don't want to frame it like this, but we know they're poor because of exploitation and white supremacy. So they are forced to resort to crime more often because of that. And it's a cultural issue and an economic issue, rather than facing the fact that that's just a tiny sliver of the truth. And again, just this wanting to dodge around and be like, no, it's this is, shut up. The results speak for themselves. And he's like, it's natural that the Han would excel. Do you complain that the apples in the orchards of Fasa are bigger than those from Hakru, or that the crabs caught in the Zathan Gulf are tastier than those caught off the shores of Ogay? And I would think something had gone horribly wrong if not as many Han scholars had achieved the top rank. And she says, is Han all of Dara? Are the people of the other provinces of Dara of less worth? And he throws his ledger on the floor and is just fucking raging and waving his arms and yelling. You're from a humble land of illiterate peasants, yet today the emperor and all the lords of Dara have lent you their ears. And she asks, you say that you are looking for talent, but it seems much more like you're looking for habits of mind. And he's sort of I've heard this argument before, and I still think that it's garbage. I have designed the imperial examinations to reward creativity, insight, boldness of thought, refinement, and expression. And you need to know how to craft arguments. You need to do this and that. This is all a test of talent. And she says, you see the surface instead of everything beneath. The examination prizes beauty of expression and fine calligraphy as well as sharpness of argument, but do you not see that these are judgments shaped by habit? For years, you and the other judges have studied together and read each other's essays until you have formed a consensus of what is persuasive and what is pleasing. You have then taught those to your students, who in turn taught theirs, propagating a certain ideal. This ideal is most concentrated in the academies of Han, but it's thin everywhere else. What you call beauty and grace and suppleness in writing are nothing but the consensus of men who have grown used to hearing each other. When you judge an essay good, it's only because the words seem to you to echo your own thoughts. Even if you cannot see the faces behind the logograms, you pick men who are just like you. I am here because I learned to write as the image in the mirror you so love. And she gets fucking cut off by DeFiro coming in and yelling that he has urgent news, and I've never been so angry. What? I love this so much. Like, she has proven her point in the method that she used to get here in the first place. And it is endlessly delightful to me that she can just be like, dude, do you not see? I'm looking right at the fucking emperor right now. How do you think that I managed to get here? It's not because I happen to have so much more talent than anybody else. I haven't had official schooling. You know, she had a tutor. But she's like, this is not how this works. I just knew exactly how to approach you. And that's it. That's all it is. That's not, you can't expect everyone to just reflect your own ideas back at you. And I can't, like, y'all, this is one of those things, I was talking about this, and it's kind of come up recently, actually. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have seen the memes about OK Boomer, and the fact that millennials especially have grown really sick of being thrown into this like category of entitled, lazy, idealistic, naive brats that just like want things handed to them without working for it, when we push ourselves a lot and have a lot of like self-loathing because we always think we're not doing enough, when we do more than previous generations have ever had to do just to get by, and we're barely managing that. And a lot of people have expressed some problems with the OK Boomer as like grouping everybody from this one generation together. But we have not resorted to this until years have passed now of us attempting to reach out to an element of the population with facts and figures to back up our arguments, and have been continually rebuffed and told that we are incorrect by a group of people who claim to value education and facts. And this is the part that's so fucking annoying, is that you can get in an argument with somebody like this and they'll be like, you need to educate yourself. And it's like, any way that this goes, you're going to lose. So you have, I'm not making enough money at my job. Well, you should have gone to school. If you went to school, you'd be making better money. Okay, I'm going to go to school. I still can't get a better job, and now I have a ton of debt. Well, it's not my fault that you picked a bad major. Maybe if you picked a better major, you'd be making more money. And so apparently education is not valuable unless it's a very, very particular kind of education that will get you a very particular kind of job. And that is not a guarantee, by the way. People take majors all the time thinking it will guarantee them a job, and they do not get them. Then there's the arguments about what's going on socially with our justice system, with the oppression of minorities and women and the disabled. And those numbers aren't out. That these studies are blah, blah, blah. Educate yourself. So, okay, we go take classes about social justice, about Black history, and we find out it's fucking way worse than we thought. In fact, it's so much more horrifying than we ever expected, and become even more radical than we were before. And the boomers are just like, oh, those liberal colleges are biased, and they have like brainwashed you. So again, go get an education, but go to the like one school that we don't think is too liberal. Otherwise, your education is also invalid. And talking about like gender studies and, you know, homosexuality and all of these like different spectrums. You need an education. There's men and there's women, and that's it. Vaginas and penises. That's it. Educate yourselves. And we go get an education and find out that there are like lots of different genders, that throughout history, many different societies recognize more than two genders, that genitals are often not associated with the kinds of hormones that are flowing through a person's system that are meant to determine genders, and the kinds of chromosomes that are out there. And when we tell them that, they don't want to hear it either. Because in truth, to these people, education doesn't matter. They want to hear what they believe repeated back to them. That's it. That's all they want. They want people who believe the things that they have always believed because it is deeply uncomfortable for them to realize that they have been functioning in a world with certain ideals and ideas and a belief system that nothing in science supports in any way. Y'all have been fucking up. And you just don't want to admit how bad y'all have been fucking up. That's really what it comes down to. It's scary to you to realize that studies of every subject that you want to argue with us about, climate change, like pick a thing, none of it supports your fucking thesis. Gun control, I mean, like name a thing. So many studies done about it. And they just don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear the facts, the figures, the statistics, even though they claim that's what they're basing everything on. People like this, the facts are not what matters. Your presentation, your passion about it, your personal experiences, they don't matter. They want to hear the thing that they know to be true because they just know it the way that anybody knows anything that they just know because they've been told by parents and they've just clung to that. That knowledge isn't real. It's not knowledge. It's an assumption that is deeply flawed and has never been examined and has been perpetuated by other people who are in their same class system, like almost always of their same race. They are surrounded by people who have all benefited from certain privilege and have all been repeating the same garbage to one another. And they believe that they have like fucking cracked the code when in fact they have just kept themselves isolated from reality because it's not pleasant. And like, I understand that impulse. I mean, I do. Reality is fucking terrible most of the time. I definitely get it. But like, you can't then yell at people that they need to get an education and open their eyes and like understand the world better when you unilaterally refuse to accept any of the facts presented to you for a variety of reasons, mostly trying to cite that the source that study is coming from is biased, which is always the thing. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well, you know, it was a bunch of liberals that did that study, so of course they thought that. Okay, sure. That's like, there's a reason that they keep thinking that, and it's because liberals tend to use more facts to support their arguments, and therefore facts tend to skew liberal. Not because we're looking for certain outcomes, but because liberals use those facts to formulate their opinions. And this whole like conversation with her just being like, y'all just got together and decided what was acceptable, and now you're judging everybody else based on what your tiny little fucking clique decided. And that's basically horse shit from start to finish. Like, y'all are gassing each other up, acting like you have figured it out, and nobody else has figured it out except for the fucking 10 people in this room. Maybe you didn't figure it out. Just putting out there that that's possible. And you guys are deeply wrong. And you simply have nobody in your group telling you that things aren't the way you think. And anybody who submits any essay or an idea that falls outside this pretty narrow idea of what is good isn't going to impress you or any of your friends, because you're all functioning the same way. You've all read the same 4 books. Somebody wrote something not in relation to those books, and you're just like, what's this garbage? It's self-perpetuating. And you're going to pick other students to present to the emperor who agree with your ideas. And those students get to come here, which automatically gives them some sort of status in the community, they get assigned to prestigious positions within education sometimes, or other positions of power. And so those students who agree with your thought processes become the judges later and continue on with this cycle of believing these like 5 tenets that you all hold so dear. There is never an opportunity for somebody to break through with a different idea. And that's a fucking problem. And I'm so mad that she gets interrupted. I'm so mad that the chapter ends here and Kyle's like all gloating in the chat. Tee see you in December. Shut up, Kyle. How dare you? I'm so mad. It's going to be so long, guys. The next episode isn't until, let's see, where am I now? It's not until the 20th. Oh, it's going to be nearly Christmas. I'm dying. I can read it right away, at least. I'm waiting to record on it, but I can read it right away. So yeah, guys, I am just like, Zomi, I'm here for you. Girl, I love you. You're great. She is, I feel, going to find a real ally with fucking Gia. Because Gia is so like anti-capitalist, and I feel like that ties in deeply with what Zomi is like learning and believing. It'd be interesting if both Gia, and Risana found different things that they could each like, if they found a bridge in Zomi. But, you know, who knows? I'm just hoping for like this ideal thing where the women are no longer fighting against one another. And I want that to be because they find somebody who's able to sort of speak to each of them. But we'll see. Kyle says Zomi is such a fun protagonist. She really is. And it's one of those things that's like, I feel like the adversity that she has experienced in her life is the sort of thing that can go either way. You could either do what she has done and become more curious about the world and more eager to pursue opportunities, or you can choose to accept the limitations that other people tell you that you have and not progress at all. And while it's easy to look at that choice and be very judgmental about it, it's also something that I feel is deeply understandable, because unless you have a great deal of confidence, or indeed maybe just ignorance, there's a great deal of, like, when we talk about like what we were like in our youth, we took risks in large part because we didn't fully understand the potential consequences, right? So one could argue that Zomi like maybe didn't totally get what could go wrong by doing things that she's done or making the choices that she has, and she may still not. She's still very young, even in this scene. But for whatever reason, she was blessed with a personality that is much more of a risk taker and doesn't see limits the way that some people do, you know, even though she's experienced a lot of loss, family, and then, you know, the use of one of her legs. It's just interesting to me, the different ways that people can choose to take on similar situations. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Kyle, again, for commissioning this. This book has been really good. Very interesting. And I will be seeing you all again in December. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.